In just 48 hours, the Florence of the Elbe was transformed into a literal hell on earth. February 1945. The Allies unleashed a firestorm of 700,000 phosphorus bombs on a city with no major defense. The heat was so unnatural it created a fire tornado, sucking civilians directly into the inferno. Was it a strategic necessity to end the war, or a calculated war crime against a civilian population? Dresden remains the ghost that haunts the conscience of the victors. What do you think? Justice or atrocity? In just 2 days, the Florence of the Elbe was erased, replaced by a hellscape that challenged the world's conscience. Was it a military necessity to end the war, or a calculated act of terror against a civilian population? Intelligence labeled it a transport hub, yet the sheer scale of destruction suggested a much darker objective. Today, the city has risen from the ashes, but the controversy remains as immortal as the stone itself. When the smoke of war clears, who truly decides what was justified? You be the judge. Was it a strategic necessity, or a calculated massacre that the world chooses to forget? In one single night, a man-made firestorm hotter than the gates of hell consumed everything in its path. 25,000 souls vanished in an instant. Some historians argue the true toll was much higher. Even the pilots were shaken. They could see the glow of the burning city from 200 miles away. A city erased, a world divided. Does the end ever truly justify such a devastating means? Was it a military necessity, or a calculated act of cold-blooded terror? 25,000 lives vanished in a single night of fire and ash. The target wasn't just factories, it was the very spirit of a nation, incinerated from above. To this day, the ashes of Dresden scream a question the world still refuses to answer. In the pursuit of total victory, does the line between hero and villain simply disappear? Was it a strategic necessity, or a calculated massacre that stained the pages of history? In just 60 minutes, centuries of art and culture were vaporized in a 1,500-degree firestorm. 25,000 souls vanished, not in a battlefield, but in their own basements. Even today, the world remains divided. Was this a war crime hidden behind the cloak of victory? Dresden remains the ghost that haunts the conscience of the winners. What do you believe? Was this a military necessity, or a calculated act of terror that crossed the line? Even Winston Churchill questioned the morality of such total destruction in the final months of the war. Over 25,000 lives were erased in a single night of fire and brimstone. Today, the city has been rebuilt, but the scars on the collective memory remain unhealed. The Dresden bombing, a necessary victory or a stain on history? The debate rages on. In just 2 nights, the Florence of the Elbe was transformed into a literal, inescapable hell. 3,900 tons of explosives dropped, not on military bunkers, but on the cultural heart of a city packed with refugees. 25,000 dead, some say more. The air was so hot it literally melted the asphalt beneath their feet. Was it a necessary move to end the war, or a calculated war crime that the victors buried in history? 80 years later, the ashes have settled, but the controversy burns as bright as the firestorm itself, a shadow on the Allies' victory. In just 2 days, a masterpiece of European architecture was transformed into a silent graveyard of ashes. Thousands simply vanished into thin air, leaving behind nothing but scorched shadows on the pavement. Was it a strategic necessity to end the war, or a calculated act of terror against a civilian population? Even today, the ghosts of Dresden demand an answer that history still struggles to provide. The fire has long since died out, but the debate surrounding this night burns hotter than ever. Was the firebombing of Dresden a strategic necessity, or a calculated crime against humanity that the world prefers to forget? In just 2 days, the Florence of the Elbe was erased from the map, replaced by a lunar landscape of ash and twisted steel. Tens of thousands perished in a heat so intense it melted the very asphalt beneath their feet. There was no escape. Critics argue the city held no military value, while the Allies claimed it was a vital heart of the Nazi war machine. The debate still rages. Decades later, the ghosts of Dresden still ask one haunting question. Was this justice, or was it pure vengeance? A city erased in a single night. Was it a military necessity, or the greatest war crime of the Allied forces? To the survivors, the sky didn't just fall. It turned into a furnace that melted the very asphalt beneath their feet. 2,700 tons of explosives. A firestorm so hot it sucked the oxygen out of human lungs for miles. The world cheered the victory, but the ghosts of Dresden still demand an answer. Why a civilian target? Dresden is the scar that never healed, a haunting reminder that in war, even the good side can walk through hell. Was it a strategic necessity or a cold-blooded war crime that the world chose to ignore? In just one night, 3,900 tons of explosives turned a Florence on the Elbe into a furnace of ash. Critics call it terror bombing. The Allies called it the final blow to the Nazi war machine. But the bodies in the streets weren't soldiers. Decades later, the ghosts of 25,000 civilians still demand an answer that history refuses to give. When the winners write the history books, does the truth get buried in the rubble? What do you believe? Was this strategic justice or a total descent into madness? The official records claim military necessity, but the ghosts of Dresden tell a far darker story. When the line between hero and villain blurs in the heat of fire, who truly holds the moral high ground? A city reborn from its own ashes, yet carrying a burden of controversy that time simply cannot erase. If the sky rained fire on your world tonight, would you call it victory or a crime? You decide. Was it a tactical necessity or the most debated war crime of the 20th century? In just 3 days, Allied bombers unleashed a firestorm that erased an entire city from the map. 25,000 lives were extinguished. Some say it was to end the war, others call it pure vengeance. The heat was so intense, it literally sucked the oxygen out of the lungs of those hiding in shelters. The ruins have been rebuilt, but the moral debate remains unhealed. Was the destruction of Dresden justified? Tell me your side. Was it a brilliant tactical strike to end the war, or the most unnecessary massacre in human history? In just 3 days, the Florence on the Elbe was wiped off the map by 3,900 tons of high explosives. The firestorm was so hot, it sucked the oxygen out of lungs and melted the very asphalt beneath their feet. 25,000 lives vanished. Most were civilians. Even today, the ghosts of Dresden demand an answer. A military necessity or a war crime? Tell us what you believe in the comments below. Was it a strategic military necessity or a calculated massacre that the world chooses to forget? In just 48 hours, the Florence on the Elbe was erased from the map by 3,900 tons of high explosives. The firestorm was so intense, it sucked the oxygen out of lungs and turned the very streets into liquid asphalt. Even today, historians argue, did this operation actually shorten the war, or was it a terrifying display of pure vengeance? If this happened today, would we call it justice or a war crime? Tell me what you believe in the comments. The smoke eventually cleared, but the silence that followed was even more deafening. Was it a strategic necessity or a calculated act of terror? Even the Allied commanders began to tremble at what they had unleashed. Today, Dresden stands tall once more, yet the scars are etched into every stone of its rebirth. History is written by the victors, but the fires of Dresden burn a hole right through that narrative. Was this the price of peace, or a crime the world chose to forget? Tell us your side in the comments. The Dresden firestorm was not just a military strike. It was a descent into hell that still haunts history. Over 3,900 tons of high explosives and incendiaries turned a cultural jewel into a massive crematorium. Was it a strategic necessity to end the war, or a cold-blooded act of vengeance against a defenseless civilian population? Temperatures reached 1,500 degrees. The city did not just burn, it melted into a landscape of ash and bone. Decades later, the ashes of Dresden remain a chilling reminder of the thin, terrifying line between victory and atrocity. Was it a military necessity, or a calculated act of terror? In just 2 days, a jewel of European culture was erased from the map. The firestorm was so intense it literally sucked the oxygen out of the air, leaving no escape for thousands. Even today, the world asks, did these 3,900 tons of explosives actually shorten the war? Dresden remains a haunting scar on the conscience of the victors. What is your verdict? Was it a strategic necessity of war, or a cold-blooded massacre that stained the Allied victory? In just 2 days, over 25,000 lives were erased in a firestorm so intense it sucked the oxygen from the lungs of those in shelters. Even decades later, the question haunts us. Did the Allies cross the line into a war crime? Dresden eventually rose from its ashes, but the moral debate remains unburied. Justice or atrocity? History is written by the victors, but the truth belongs to the ghosts. What do you believe? Even after decades, the haunting question remains. Was the destruction of Dresden a military necessity or a calculated war crime? In just 2 days, 25,000 lives vanished in a firestorm that turned a jewel on the Elbe into a furnace of ash. The scars are no longer just on the buildings, they are etched into the very soul of modern European history. Critics call it terror bombing, meant to break the civilian spirit, while defenders argue it was the only way to end the madness of the Reich. Dresden remains the ultimate symbol of total war. Was the price of victory too high? The debate is yours to finish.